You got your vintage PAF pickups, you've got your vintage P90 pickups, you've got your KZ-LP115 vintage PAF pickup winder, and time travel. What they all have in common coming up. As owner of Throwback Electronics, I've often been accused of having magic pickup winders, because my thing is to try to duplicate the production methods of vintage pickups, and I go as far as getting the actual machines, some of which actually came out of the Gibson factory. Two of them, as a matter of fact, I own, once resided in the Gibson factory and were used in the 50s. And one of those machines is the KZ-LP115 pickup winder. And I'm just going to give details about that. I've given info about the Lisona 102 and the Slug 101 pickup winders that we use. And I figure it's probably time to do a video about this magical pickup winder. And honestly, to me, this does qualify as magic. I mean, the machine was once purchased by Gibson in 1950, rescued from salvage by Les Paul himself, who took it out of the Kalamazoo factory before they moved to Nashville, and then put back into working use by Throwback. And if you're a pickup maker, I think that's probably as close as you can get to real magic. But it also does some interesting things. The machine, compared to the other known pickup winders for PAFs and P90s, and I'll get into some of those details. But first, I'm going to give the backstory on how I got the machine. I always find just finding these things interesting, so I'll give some info about that. Okay, so the story begins with this machine. About 10 years ago, 2008 or so, a friend of mine, Matthew Larrabee, who was also at the time interested in PAF pickups and vintage Gibson pickups, he emailed me a photo from a book he had found that showed a pickup winder in the 1950s in use at Gibson in the factory, and I'll show a photo of that machine. I saw the machine, and it was obvious, well, this is used by Gibson in the 1950s, and logically I thought, well, I've got some of the other machines. I'm short of having the machine, I want to find out the model of machine in the photo and see if I can get the equivalent. So I contacted Geo Stevens, which was the manufacturer of the machine originally, which is still in business, and they made me kind of their last iteration of that machine, which I use for pickup winding. They literally made it from spare parts they still had on the shelf. I paid $8,900 for it, but I felt at the time, for what I'm making, this makes sense to get. It's a great machine. But there were, from the photo, there's a lot of information to glean from the photo as far as how the pickup setup was with that winder. But obviously I'm limited as to knowing what really is going on with the setup with the machine without having it in hand. All right, so fast forward to 2014, and I'm on the internet, and I probably on a forum, someone mentions a pickup maker that has a machine that he claims is from the Gibson factory. And I go to the website, and it's Tom Doyle's website, and I look on the page, and sure enough, knowing what I know about the photo Matthew Larrabee sent me, I compare it to the photo of the pickup winder that he claims is from the Kalamazoo factory, and yeah, it looks like the same. It looks like it's the machine, or one identical to it. Has the fixtures, same machine model, many of the same markings. So I think, wow, that's pretty cool. Tom Doyle is a longtime luthier, repairman, restorer for Les Paul, and over the years he received items from Les Paul, and this was one of those items. And Les Paul, the story from Les Paul is he was offered by Gibson when Gibson was leaving the Kalamazoo factory to come in to the Kalamazoo plant and take anything that wasn't going to go to Nashville that he was interested in, and this pickup winder is one of those items. And so it was literally taken out of the factory, Kalamazoo factory, by Les Paul himself. And apparently Les Paul didn't really use the machine, and at some point said, Tom, you can have it. Tom Doyle, you can have it. And so Tom's got the machine. It's on his website, and I think, I like that machine. But, maybe I should contact Tom Doyle. But no, Tom's got the machine. Good for him. It's a pretty cool item. He's got a history with it through Les Paul, and why not? I can't have all the cool stuff. I'd like to have all the cool stuff, but, good for Tom. He's got a cool machine there. And to the minute I contact him, well, it's probably, he knows there's other people interested in it, and the value of it goes up. So I'll just leave it at that. Tom Doyle's got a cool machine. Good for Tom. And that's where it stands as of 2014. All right, so fast forward now to 2015. And one of my employees is sitting down at the table having lunch looking through Guitar Player magazine, and he says, hey, there's a pickup winder for sale here that's going to be part of an auction for Tom Doyle. It's in this Guitar Player magazine here. And I said, oh, let me see that. So look at the page. And on that page is the same pickup winder right there. That is the machine that Tom Doyle owned and was up for auction. And this is a list of contents for the Guernsey's auction. Items up for sale at the Guernsey's auction of Les Paul equipment, and a guitar here that was being profiled in this magazine. And I thought, wow, well, okay. I'm guessing I'm not the only guy that is familiar with what this machine is. And it says here that it's a original Gibson Kalamazoo pickup winder. I thought, well, I can't be the only guy that has seen this, but I'll bid on it because I'd like to get it. So with that information in mind, I contact Guernsey's auction house and find out what the bid increments are and when the auction will be and how I can go about bidding. And I decided to, had to kind of calculate in my mind the starting bid price was going to be $8,000. How much was I willing to pay for a machine with that sort of history to it? So I decided, well, I'd paid $8,900 for a machine new, but certainly this thing is worth that, even though it's obviously been used. But, with the history of it, it has the original fixtures, it appears to, and the wire guides and all. This is essentially as close as you can get to a Gibson pickup time machine. It may not be the Hadron Collider, but for me, it's pretty darn close. So I thought, well, the bid increment goes up once it hits $10,000. I think I'd be willing to pay $10,000 for it, but when it hits that $10,000, bid increment goes up to $1,000. And if you're going to go to 10, someone else may go above that. That might as well be me. So I contact Guernsey's and I decided, just in my own head, $11,000 is as much as I'm willing to pay for this thing. So the day of the auction arrives and I'm phone bidding. And the nice lady from the auction house gives me a call and she says, well, your item is coming up. And my suggestion is don't place first bid until someone else bids. Because if we're going to start it out at $8,000, if no one bids, the auctioneer will drop the bid price. And he'll just keep dropping that until someone bids. So I can hear in the background and that the bidding's starting. It starts at $8,000, and nice lady says, well, it started at $8,000. Wouldn't you like to bid? And I say no. Goes down to $7,000. No one bids. I say no. Goes down to 6. No one bids. I say no. Continues to go down till it gets to $600. And she says, it's at $600. Do you want to bid? And I said, sure. $600. Well, there was one other person, I think that was there, who bid $700. So, would I like to bid 8? Yes, sure. So that goes back and forth a few times until it comes to $1,600. And I get it for $1,600. So I'm happy about that. So anyway, it's packed up, gets packed up. I pay for it, it gets packed up. It arrives. And now the history of this machine is, I've seen it. I know from the photos I've seen that if this is not the exact machine in the photos, it's one set up exactly like it. It has the same markings on it as far as the writing on the casing of it, the plates that they use for fixtures for the bobbins. But in the photo, it's making P90 pickups. And basically that's the info I've got. I know this thing is probably set up for P90s. It's the same fixtures and all. And so when it arrives, I take a look at it. I don't really know anything beyond the photos that I've seen of the same machine in use at Gibson and the one that's now arriving. So I unbox it and I take a close look at it. And I bought it thinking, well, this is, obviously it did P90s. And I look at the fixtures, and on the fixtures you can also see a wear pattern for PAF bobbins. So I'm like, wow, that's great. Haven't even switched the machine on, and I already know it's done P90s and because there's a photo of it, making them in the 50s, and it's obviously done PAF pickups, which makes sense because the pole spacing for both P90s and PAF pickups is the same. And lo and behold, our reproduction bobbins fit right on the thing. So after taking a closer look at the machine, I noticed it's still got the serial number tag on the machine, and it says GeoStevens 1307. And there's a tool tag on it also that says A, E, and E. So I think, though, the first thing to do is contact the good people at GeoStevens who sold me a $8,900 machine previously and ask them, do they have any record for serial number 1307? I email them. They email me back a scan of shipping ledger from 1950, February 1950, of shipping machine number 1307 to Allen Electric and Equipment. And so I look them up, and they're in Kalamazoo. Not only were they in Kalamazoo, they were blocks from the Gibson factory, just down the street. And I find out that they were an electric supply company, as well as also making electronic equipment such as ohm meters. And I actually did a video previously about how I put 2 and 2 together and realized that the photo I had of this machine in use at Gibson in the 50s also showed an ohm meter that turns out Allen Electric and Equipment made also. I want to check that video if you're really into this stuff. But anyway, now I've got a direct line of this machine being sold to Allen Electric Equipment, who I'm sure was a dealer for these machines, shipping it to them, in turn to Gibson, Kalamazoo factory, and obviously in use through the 50s, and at some point mothballed at Gibson, Kalamazoo, orphaned, rescued by Les Paul himself, carries it out of the Kalamazoo factory, goes to Tom Doyle through Les Paul. I buy it at auction, and now I'm going to fix it up, getting back to doing what it's supposed to do, which is make pickups. All right, enough talk about that machine. I'm gonna do a video showing the machine. Again, for me as a pickup winder, it's pretty cool. Literally, I'm gonna be using a machine that belonged to Les Paul, so it's kind of It's kind of iconic in that regard, although I don't think he really used it much. But it's cool that he rescued it. If he hadn't, who knows what happened to it, because obviously Gibson Nashville wasn't interested in it. I think they had moved on to much larger, much faster, and much more efficient machines. But this thing was there from the start, making P90s, early PAFs. It's got some cool details, and I'll do my best to kind of go through those, explain how they're different from some of the other machines Gibson is known to have used for PAFs and P90s. And there's also some peculiar differences in the finished coil. I'll show some of those coming up. I'm just going to go over some of the details with this machine. I'll wind a few test coils, and as I go, I'll explain how this is kind of unique among the vintage PAF and P90 pickup winders compared to the others. They're all unique in their own way. This has its own kind of set of details that affect how the pickup coil builds. The first detail is the cam here is a non-lobed cam. What that means is basically a lobed cam would be some variation on a heart shape, and what that does is it assures that the traverse travel of the wire guides here is even as it goes left and right across the bobbin. Since it's non-lobed, it means that it builds up on the ends of the coil. In order to compensate for that, this cam is smaller, much smaller than the traverse travel required for a P90 or a PAF bobbin. It's a 1/4 inch there. This cam is for a much smaller dimension than a 1/4 inch. I put tape over that dimension because that's kind of a bit of the secret sauce of this thing, or magic. But that is important to how this builds a coil. Another interesting detail with this is you can see, I think this will show up in the video, but you can see the outline of a P90 bobbin and a PAF bobbin. So they use this machine for both. There's a wear pattern for both of those bobbins on these aluminum fixtures. These plates would line up alternately to put 4 bobbins on the machine. I'll do that in a minute. What's important about that limited traverse travel is it builds the coil wire up on the very center of the bobbin. If you look at the finished coil, you would not know this because it'll just appear to be a normally shaped coil. But as that coil builds, the wire piles up in the center and then falls away on the perimeter towards the flange edges of the bobbin. And what that does is it makes a coil that's much fatter and looser for more tension than would be required on the Lee-Sona 102. Lee-Sona 102 requires half the tension that this machine does in order to build a coil that's tight enough for a pickup. But the result is you get a coil that's got much more internal tension with this, but at the same time is fatter and has more empty space within it, creating a fatter coil, even though the turn per layer is the same. The turn as the Lee-Sona 102. The turn per layer for both the Lee-Sona 102, I'll get a shot of this back here too, is determined by, for this machine, is determined by the gears in the back of here. This is geared, and it has the gears it came with to me, and they're exactly the gears you would expect to have for 42 gauge wire with a 1/4 inch size bobbin. And that is one of the standard gear sets with the Lee-Sona 102. So both pickup machines, Lee-Sona 102 and this machine, use the same turn per layer, but because of these differences in traverse travel and lobed cam on this, or sorry, non-lobed cam on this and lobed cam on the Lee-Sona 102, you end up with 2 much different coils, and it does add up to a tonal difference. Another detail here is the wire guides on this machine are the original Gibson wire guides. The distance these wire guides are from the bobbin affects the scatter of the wire. So this is an important detail part that's just built into this machine. The counter is a non-auto stop counter. It's a simple dial, and it can be used, it's used to count the turns, but it does not stop on a preset number. So in order to make sure it stops, you literally have to switch it off right there. And it does work, but it's not super accurate, obviously, to stop it. If you're doing other things, you have to really be paying attention to when this thing stops and how long it takes to ramp down speed in order to get very accurate turn counts. Now we do that, but that wasn't happening at Gibson, I don't think. But we kind of build that, and we have very specific turn counts that we target that are written here on the machine, but I've covered them up with Post-it notes for the KZ115, and we also, which is a PAF model we make on this. And also we sort of do some off-menu P90s that we make some for Rock and Roll Relics and other people. The motor on this machine, actually we recently changed it because the original motor, which we have, was like a sort of a storm of, how would I describe it? A storm of mold smell coming out of it every time we switched it on. And then not too long ago it started smoking, so we thought it's probably best to retire it. But we didn't have any problem finding another motor, a new motor with the same RPM. So I'll show the original motor, which is dated 1955. Machine itself is 1950, as dated by the shipping record. So Gibson went through, between 1950 and 1955, they went through a motor on this thing. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wind a few coils here. And maybe I mentioned this before, but there's a limit to how many turns you can put on this, just because the coils are so much fatter. You cannot make a pickup that's beyond 7.8K, not a PAF style pickup. P90s you can go higher than that, but PAF no. So I'll load this up with bobbins and maybe point out a few details as I go. The plate goes on here between the two, for the next bobbin, to put the internal start wire in it prior to the bobbin going on to the fixture. These fit right on. Our bobbins are made exactly to the vintage dimension. And the start wire, they've made a little groove in here for the start wire to pass through a slot in the bobbin and then be held in place here as it winds. Put a little piece of tape there. It's interesting when doing this too, you can see that Gibson was working out the details of how to do this, how to make these more efficiently. By stacking the bobbins, but they actually, their effort here for this lip to work as a limiting factor, for a limiting stop for the wire traverse. It works, but the fact that they had to put the slot in here for the start wire to pass through means that they had to limit the travel with the cam even further. Otherwise, it catches on that notch. So they had good intentions with that, but it didn't really work out as planned. So they kind of, their workaround was this smaller cam. Another kind of detail that they even worked into this is the wire guides come together at the top here, so it'll hold the the magnet wire, when you're after you cut it, so you don't have to fish it through again, it's just kind of a little extra detail that makes it easier to put these on here. Okay, so we've got it all loaded up, and with 4 bobbins. As I was mentioning earlier, the most for a PAF style pickup you can get on this would result in around a 7.8K pickup. Beyond that, you're really overflowing the bobbin with wire, and that's consistent with very early PAFs. I believe this machine would have been used for primarily the very earliest PAFs, although I'm sure they continued to use it. But very early PAFs are unusual to find one above 7.8K. When you're repairing it, a vintage one, it would be hard, without using this machine, it would be hard to know whether or not the pickup you were repairing was wound on the Lee-Sona 102 or this, because they have the same turn per layer. But again, these make a much fatter coil for the same turn per layer, so which is consistent with the very early PAFs. For P90s, though, you can get more than, you could do a 9K pickup on this thing, without a problem, but 7.8 is your limit for a PAF. Okay, so we have everything set up here. We have to zero out the counter. There's 2 dials on this. One is for a full rotation, 100 turns. The other, it's a notch for every 100 turns. So you can get a fairly accurate count, but you, again, have no auto stop counter, so you have to just switch the machine off when it's time. If you take a close look at this, another interesting thing is that this is not real stable. There's a bit of movement with the fixtures. Bearings are fine in this. This has a brand new bearing, and the bearing for the main mandrel here is fine, but between the fixtures being stacked and the coupling that they have here, you've got a fair amount of movement, which also affects the winding of the pickup. In comparison to the Lee-Sona 102 or even the Slug 101 winder or Meteor winder, this is a lot more wobbly. All right, so here are my 2 test bobbins. This is just my kind of really basic test to demonstrate the difference between these 2 machines as far as how they mechanically end up with different coils. On the right is the KZ115 bobbin wound with the same turns as the Lee-Sona 102, same wire, same size wire. I think you can see the Lee-Sona coil's a fair amount smaller, but the KZ actually required, although it's still within the spec for 42 gauge wire, this requires twice the tension as the Lee-Sona 102. So this actually has wire with twice the tension when wound as this does, and it really requires that in order to get the correct coil shape. So anyway, here's my sort of, I don't know, bare bones test to kind of demonstrate how these are different. I'm going to drop them from about waist height onto the floor. Start with the Lee-Sona 102, and then we'll do the KZ115. And let's look at what they look like when I pick them up. right, so there's your Leeson 102 coil. It's still pretty well intact. And the KZ115 coil has, the coil is splayed out like that. So that difference really in how they reacted to being dropped, that is just an indication of how they mechanically are totally different coils as far as how they were wound on the bobbin. Even though they use the same turn per layer, you end up with a mechanically different coil between the two. All right, I hope you found all that interesting. For me, it's really cool. Oh, and I'm holding this guitar because this is a refinished 1957 Les Paul Jr. that I had to rewind the neck pickup in. I bought it, part of my sort of player grade collection. Neck pickup needed to be rewound. I rewound it on the KZ115. And the original, I believe, was done on the same machine. And that's pretty cool. And it sounds great. Nice sort of fat sound to it. Maybe I'll play it here a second. So, anyway, I hope the video was interesting and informative. It's part of the picture of how these old pickups were made, P90s and PAFs, and I think there is magic in them, the machines, but it's not the sort of magic you expect. The magic is how the people set them up in the 50s. The people that made the machines, these are all mechanical, handmade machines, and the design varies. And in a PAF pickup, it really just adds up to different tones for different machines. They're subtle, but they're there. And it's magic, it's mojo, whatever you want to call it, but it's there. And I just honestly feel lucky to have the machines and be able to use them for making pickups that I enjoy and other people do too. So anyway, I hope that info's useful, interesting, and I find it interesting. So anyway, if you like the video, please click like. If you'd like to see more like it, click subscribe. And if you want notifications for the next one, and there will be more, click the bell. You'll get notifications for that. Leave your questions and comments below. I'd love to hear those. And once again, thanks for letting Throwback be part of your search for great guitar tone.